Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm calling to order this meeting of the Planning and Development Council of the Town of Oakville. And we have regrets from Councillors Hutchins and Robinson. Do we have any declarations of pecuniary interest? Madam Clerk, I see none. Are there any members of the public here with information for Council on consent items 1 to 3? Madam Clerk, I see none. Councillor O'Meara moves the consent items. Any discussion? All in favor? And the consent. Pardon?
Did you move this into committee of the whole?
Oh, Councillor O'Meara just moved that we resolve into committee of the whole. All those in favor?
Need a seconder.
You don't. Oh, and Alan Elgar was the seconder, and that carried. And now Councillor O'Meara has moved the consent items, and they have carried items 1 to 3. Thank you, everybody. We have a packed agenda and lots of late-breaking information, so we're going to have to be economical with our time. So, being economical of our time, I'll just note that confidential consent item C1 has been moved to a confidential discussion item later in the meeting. And that brings us to our first public hearing items, which is item number 4, the public meeting report for the Brownfield Community Improvement Plan. And Rebecca Storms is here to summarize the matter for the public. Council, of course, has already studied it in detail in the written material that's been available quite some time. Ms. Storms, edify everybody.
Good evening, Mayor Burton and members of Council. So we're here tonight for the statutory public meeting for the Brownfield Community Improvement Plan. The intention of this plan is to provide incentive programs that will encourage the cleanup of privately owned brownfield sites, bringing them into more productive use. Council directed staff to undertake the development of a brownfield strategy and CIP. Last fall, Council endorsed the strategy, and since then we've been working on the development of this community improvement plan. So today's meeting is required under the Planning Act as a statutory public meeting. Our goal with this meeting is really to receive feedback or comments, questions from the public and Council about the draft CIP. So as required under the Planning Act, the draft has been circulated to prescribed bodies. It's also been circulated to all of the stakeholders who participated in the development of the strategy and CIP. Halton Region and the Ministry of Municipal Affairs have reviewed the document and provided their feedback. They were quite supportive of the CIP and suggested only very minor revisions. Their comments will be addressed when we bring the CIP back for adoption to this council at a later date. So in order to adopt a community improvement plan, there's 3 items that must be in place. So the first item is that the official plan must contain policies related to community improvement. In this case, that's satisfied through Livable Oakville, as well as the official plan of the Oakville planning area with regards to the North Oakville lands. They both include community improvement policies, so we're good there. Item number 2 is that council must pass a bylaw to designate the community improvement project area. That's what you see on your screens right now. So the proposed community improvement area is outlined in the thick gray there. It encompasses the entire urban area of the town, which is essentially anything south of the 407. We've recommended this because brownfields can theoretically exist anywhere in the town. They can be anything from a manufacturing plant to a former dry cleaner to a former gas station. In the strategy that was presented to you in the fall, we included priority areas, which the number 1 priority was employment areas, number 2 was the growth areas, and number 3 was the remainder of the urban area. This has been updated for this version to reflect the new urban structure. So now the priority areas are employment lands, the major transit station areas, and Midtown Oakville is priority 1. Priority 2 is the nodes and corridor, which is the area in pink that you see. And then the third priority area is the remainder of the urban area. So the third item that's required by council is that you must pass a bylaw to adopt the community improvement plan for this community improvement project area. I'll talk about the process for this in a few slides, but essentially we're going to bring forward those bylaws at a future meeting for you. Drafts were included today in the appendix. And we'll also be bringing a recommendation report to activate the incentive programs. We're currently looking to do that at the next P&D meeting on July 9th. So the CIP essentially includes 3 incentive programs. These are the same as what was presented to you in the fall, so I won't go into any real detail on them, but I'll touch on them briefly. So the first is the Environmental Study Grant Program. This will provide a grant equal to 50% of cost of eligible studies to a maximum of $3,000 for a Phase 1 environmental site assessment, a maximum of $20,000 for any other eligible study, and a combined maximum for any one project of $30,000. The Tax Assistance Program, this would provide for the cancellation of the property tax increase, municipal and education, on a property that is undergoing or has undergone remediation and development to assist with the cost of that remediation. Cancellation of the education portion is subject to approval by the Minister of Finance and is a separate process from the CIP program application. This program would last for a maximum of 3 years or until the remediation costs have been recuperated, whichever comes first. And the final program is the Tax Increment Grant Program. This would provide for an annual grant between 60% and 100% of the municipal property tax increase generated by a project for up to 12 years, or until the eligible costs have been recovered, whichever occurs first. The percentage and duration of those grant payments is dependent on the location of the project, so those priority areas, and then whether or not the project achieves other criteria such as minimum employment densities, LEED certification, exemplary building design, heritage restoration, or the inclusion of affordable or special needs housing. So a project can take advantage of all of the programs, but it's always to a maximum of the eligible costs. So you can't recoup more than your eligible costs are, and you can't claim an eligible cost in more than one program. So full details on these programs are in the CIP that were provided in the appendix. We also just want to note that Halton Region can also participate in these programs, but whether they do and how they participate is still to be determined. They have a CIP program in place. It's well suited for them to participate in the study grant program, and we'll be meeting with staff at the region to discuss and encourage their participation in the TIG and TAP programs, which will make them more valuable to an applicant. So our next steps coming out of this meeting is basically to finalize the CIP based on any feedback that we receive. We will then come back to council to bring forward those designating and adopting bylaws that I mentioned earlier, along with the recommendation report to activate the incentive programs. At this point, we're looking to come back to the July 9th P&D meeting. If council does approve the recommendation report in July and there are no appeals, we anticipate that staff will take a few months to properly develop all of the implementation materials in the fall, and we have a launch goal of January 2019. So a budget will be required for the Environmental Study Grant Program. We'll be coming to council with that budget request through the budget process for 2019. We're currently working with finance to establish the protocols for tracking and rebating the other 2 programs, and these will all be detailed through our implementation materials developed in the fall. Based on the best practice research from other communities, we're not anticipating any applications for the TIG or TAP programs in 2019. And if we do receive an application, those grants wouldn't be paid out until after the project's complete and MPAC has done a reassessment. So it's a few years out before we'd actually be looking at giving out those grants. So if council approves and adopts the CIP and bylaws, staff will develop the full implementation plan. This includes things like application forms, legal agreements, policies and procedures, staff training, and a full marketing plan and materials. The draft CIP already provides program administration guidelines, but all of the details will get fleshed out through the fall. A staff team will be formed, including representatives from economic development, environmental policy, planning, and finance, who will jointly be responsible for administering the programs. And training and definition of those roles will be fleshed out again through the implementation process in the fall. So what can you expect to see in 2019? We anticipate that we may see 1 or 2 study grant applications in year 1. And as I mentioned previously, we don't really anticipate seeing anything for the other two programs until a little bit further along. So that concludes my presentation. I'd like to offer the opportunity for any questions or comments. We also have our consultant here with us tonight who can assist with answering any technical questions.
Thank you very much, Ms. Storms. Council, you have questions? Councillor Adams?
Thank you very much. Would you mind flipping back to, you had a budget item, I think it was the third slide back or something like that. I just wanted to know if you have some order of magnitude estimates that you could share with us in terms of the scale of the program and the impact it would have.
So for the first year, we were anticipating a request of around $30,000. That would allow potentially for a couple of applications. If we just got environmental study grants, phase 1, we're looking at $3,000 an
Which are quite
application.
limited.
Pardon?
Which are quite limited in terms of their size.
Right.
Yeah.
And then the others, any one particular study grant has a maximum of $20,000. So what we're considering right now is asking for $30,000. We'd also be able to tap into the Regions program as well, which would provide matching dollars.
Okay. And then in future years, so I understand in terms of the rollout in the early years, there's likely to be limited numbers involved. In later years, if it were to be successful in terms of a program, are there best practices in terms of budgeting and managing the output of a program like this?
Through you, Mayor Burton, we do have some estimates on utilization. So in year 2, we were estimating about 3 applications. Years 3 and 4, looking at 4 to 5. So that will guide us.
These are the numbers on page 143 of the agenda, or page 36 of the
page 36.
the
Yes,
report.
that's right.
And I appreciate that they're targets, they're estimates. You're taking
Right.
best guesses based on what other people have seen, and that kind of thing. Okay, thank you very much. I appreciate that.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Are there members of the public with information for council on this file? I'll ask again and again, and I'll bring the matter back and accept Councillor Adams' motion to receive. And Mr. Simeone, I don't think you have any additional questions to add to the resolution.
That's correct, Your Worship. We do note the Councillor Adams' request to understand fully funding issues down the road.
Thank you very much. All those in favor? Opposed, if any? None. All right, that's carried. And that brings us to number 5. This is the public meeting and recommendation report for the zoning bylaw amendment for the All Seniors Care Acquisitions Limited project at 2135 Dundas Street West. And Paul Barrett is already in the saddle, ready to ride.
Thank you very much, Mayor Burton and members of council. A zoning bylaw amendment was submitted by All Seniors Care Acquisitions LID to permit a nursing home. The public meeting recommendation report can be found on page 175 of tonight's agenda. The subject lands are located on the north side of Dundas Street West, west of Hospital Gate. On December 6th of 2017, the applicant submitted a rezoning application to permit a nursing home ranging in height from 4 to 6 stories, comprised of 98 assisted living units and 84 total care units. Since then, the owner agreed to revise their application to prohibit dwelling units in the site-specific zoning, thereby only allowing assisted living units, clarified that the entire facility will be a purpose-built institutional building pursuant to Group B3 care occupancy of the Ontario Building Code, and have revised the ground floor, as shown in the slide, along the public street frontages to include active uses. The applicant also submitted a land use compatibility study in support of the application. The subject lands are designated employment district by the North Oakville West Secondary Plan, and based on the analysis provided in the staff report, it is within the health-oriented mixed-use node. The secondary plan provides special policies for the health-oriented mixed-use node, which include restrictions for certain employment uses, as well as permissions for other land uses such as supportive housing. The proposed use would constitute a nursing home within the North Oakville framework. Based on the analysis provided in the report, the proposed nursing home conforms to the secondary plan and the Halton Region official plan. Within the context of the provincial policy statement, the proposed land use is considered special needs housing, which is a sensitive land use. The applicant submitted a land use compatibility study, which provides that the proposed development would be appropriately separated from other employment uses to prevent adverse impact on the viability of the larger employment area. Given the level of skilled care proposed within a purpose-built institutional building, the proposed nursing home, as revised, would be considered an institutional land use which may be permitted within an employment area. The growth plan provides strong protection for employment areas and prime employment areas. Institutional uses may be permitted in an employment area pursuant to the growth plan employment area policies. The proposed nursing home, as revised, would support the broader complete community objectives of the growth plan and support the health-oriented mixed-use function of the area, as the facility would provide higher-level skilled care to seniors, many of which with serious long-term health care needs. With respect to the proposed bylaw, site-specific setbacks are provided, in addition to a prohibition of a parking garage within a varying distance from the exterior building facade, which would require more active uses at grade along the public street frontages. A holding provision is also recommended as part of the site-specific zoning, which will address matters related to the updated Phase 1 environmental site assessment, extension of water and wastewater, together with associated easements, and stormwater management, including low-impact development. As outlined in the staff report, the technical review of the application addressed a number of other items, including all matters raised by council and the public through the statutory public meeting. These matters have been addressed as outlined in the staff report, and the site design will be advanced further through the required site plan application. One public comment was received regarding building height in relation to shadows and sunlight. This was reviewed in the planning analysis section of the report, and to summarize, the shadow impact analysis demonstrated that adequate sunlight is available for residential amenity spaces on the south side of Dundas Street to maximize their use during spring, summer, and fall afternoons and evenings. Staff recommends approval of the zoning bylaw amendment as the requirements listed on the slide have been satisfied. In conclusion, Your Worship, staff put forth the following recommendation as shown for Council's consideration. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Barrett. Council, any questions? Councillor Elgar?
Mayor Burton, I have no questions. At the appropriate time, I'd be prepared to move it. I'm glad that the shadow impact study was done, and it shows there will be no impact to the residents living on the road on the south side of Dundas, I think Whistling Springs. So I appreciate all the work that's been done, and it seems like the right place to put something like this, pretty close to the hospital. So I thank you.
Councillor Lischina.
Just a quick clarification, please. You noted there were 117 new jobs proposed at this site. Do you know the number of full-time and part-time jobs?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, that breakdown was not provided by the applicant. It was an estimate provided by the applicant based on their experience with this form of housing.
I would have liked to seen the actual number of each. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Are there other questions from Council? Madam Clerk, I understand do we have delegations on this?
No.
No. Well then, Councillor Elgar, I think it's...
Yes, I'd be prepared to move the staff recommendation. Thank you.
Pardon?
You're going to go to public.
Yes. So, thank you, Councillor Elgar, for the motion. Are there any members of the public with information for Council on this file? All right, then I'll call the vote. All those in favor? Opposed, if any, and that is approved. Council, if we turn to item number 6, and our attention to our Senior Planner, Rob Thun, we'll get the public meeting and recommendation report for the town-initiated site-specific zoning bylaw amendment for 1388 Dundas Street West.
Thank you, Mayor Burton and members of council. This is a combined statutory and recommendation meeting. Notice of this meeting was published in the newspaper on May 17th, was mailed out to the surrounding residents, and also published on the town's website. This is a town-initiated housekeeping zoning amendment to reintroduce zoning provisions and correct some mapping within bylaw 2014-014 as originally approved by council back in June of 2012. Concerns came to light recently with the operation of the existing sales center, and this necessitated the town-initiated amendment. Your report can be found on page 217 of tonight's agenda. And as this is a town-initiated zoning bylaw amendment, it is not subject to the amendments to the Planning Act and the timeframes. Quickly, for everyone's information, the subject property is located on the southeast corner of Dundas Street West and Proudfoot Trail. It contains the existing Mattamy Sales Center and 4 model homes that back onto Proudfoot Trail. Back in June of 2012, the site went through a zoning bylaw amendment and draft plan of vacant land condominium. The development of the site is to be phased. Model homes are to be built to reflect units for North Oakville. Okay. Unfortunately, the associated draft plan of vacant land condominium approval lapsed in August of last year. We do have a new application that is in. It is being processed presently, and we are targeting coming back to council in September of this year with a recommendation on that condominium proposal. And for the information for the residents and people on TV, it is still a single detached home development. When they see the word condominium, they're concerned that high-rise buildings are being proposed. It is still single detached homes. Okay. To the west of the site, we have stacked townhouses. To the south, we have single detached homes. And to the east, we have a tributary of the 16 Mile Creek. From a livable Oakville plan perspective, the site is designated both low-density residential and medium-density residential. There is a special exception in the livable Oakville plan that talks about low-density uses such as detached homes. It is those detached homes that are proposed by Mattamy for the future. This slide provides and reflects a little bit of the history, and you can understand the process that we've gone through. But you've got the original bylaw under existing on the left-hand side in this location here. That was approved in June of 2012. The amending bylaw in this location right here was in September of 2012. It allowed for the 4 existing model homes to be developed. And then in 2014, which is in the bottom section down here, is the mapping associated with bylaw 2014-14. So there, as you can see through the progression of those maps, there are some changes. And it's those changes that necessitated this town-initiated amendment. So on the right-hand side of your screen, you will see what's being proposed in front of council today. It's basically to bring back the original approval that was there in the language of 2014-14, the current zoning bylaw, where provisions have been reiterated and are already captured through the parent bylaw. Those have not been reiterated. But for the purposes of this bylaw, we have deleted the sections and replaced them in their entirety just for ease of reference. I will note on the bylaw, for council's information, and I have already talked to the clerk's department, clause number 1 does have a typo. It says Schedule B in the agenda. It should say Schedule A. There is no Schedule B. So in conclusion, Your Worship, we have gone through, done the review. We have worked with the zoning department. We have worked with Mattamy. We have put forth this zoning bylaw amendment for council's consideration. The amendment itself has been reviewed with regards to consistency of the PPS, conformity with the growth plan, Halton region, and the livable Oakville plan. And it does represent good planning to bring back council's approval on the development of the site. So in conclusion, Your Worship, the recommendation is before council for consideration.
Thank you, Mr. Thun. Councillor Ilger.
Yeah, thank you. Through Mayor Burton. And I just want to emphasize, like, there was a bit of a dust-up initially back in there, 2012, I think, regarding what was going to go here. And this has to do with all the Scotch Pine Drive residents and the Claiborne Place residents all agreed to what you're proposing again, which is what they had before.
That is correct, Councillor.
So we're just straightening out what shouldn't have happened in the first place. Thank you. I'd be pleased to move this recommendation at the appropriate time.
Thank you, Councillor. Madam Clerk, do we have a registered delegation for this?
No, we don't.
We just have a letter, I guess, on item 6 that I saw in the package. Are there members of the public with information for council on this matter? Madam Clerk, I see none. All those in favor? Opposed, if any? Councillor Unger, your motion is carried. That brings us to item number 7, about which we are drowning in information. Mr. Bigger, help us swim.
Thank you, Mayor Burton. Members of council, we'll try and straighten out some of the information that has been flowing to us in the last day or so. So just to begin, this is item number 7 in your agenda. It's a statutory public meeting and recommendation meeting for the town-initiated official plan amendments to the North Oakville East and the North Oakville West secondary plans. This is part of the North Oakville secondary plans review, which is a key component of our livable Oakville official plan review. So I'll begin with the recommendation just to help frame my presentation. And just wanted to note that there's 4 parts to the recommendation. The first part is to essentially satisfy the provincial test that the work being put forward in these amendments conforms to the applicable provincial plans, is consistent with the provincial policy statement, conforms with the Halton Region official plan, and represents good planning. The nuts and bolts of the recommendation are to adopt 2 bylaws representing 2 official plan amendments, OPA 321 and 322. And then finally, the statement that the notice of council's decision reflect that council has fully considered all of the written and oral submissions relating to this matter and that those comments have been appropriately addressed. And my next few remarks are going to be dealing with that, essentially that concept. As you are aware, the new standard of review under the local planning and appeal tribunal system is to be consistent with the PPS and to conform to all applicable provincial plans as stated in the recommendation. Just want to reassure council that this has been top of mind for staff as we've been preparing this work and undertaking this part of the study. Even in the context of some of the submissions received today, or these submissions received today that are before you in terms of issues around housing mix or safety, we have reviewed these submissions, and these are not new issues that are being raised. These issues have been addressed through the study and are addressed through the revisions that are put forward in these recommendations tonight. We continue to be satisfied that this work will satisfy the new local planning and appeal tribunal tests, and our recommendation has not changed as a result of these submissions. So just with that as context, I'll be proceeding with the balance of the presentation, which is really to discuss the context for these revisions to the North Oakville plans and to provide an overview of the revisions that are coming forward. So essentially the location, the North Oakville plans are to provide a planning framework for the lands north of Highway 5 to the south of Highway 7 between 9th Line and Tremaine Road. It's necessary at this time to propose these OPAs, to approve these OPAs in a timely fashion. The North Oakville plans are out of date and have not been brought up to conformity with current planning, required planning policy. To date, the approved development in North Oakville has met the minimum policy requirements that were applicable at the time, but staff are of the opinion that future development should better achieve the community vision, objectives, and policy intent of the North Oakville plans. It's important also to keep in mind that phase 1 of development, I'll get into phasing a little bit later, phase 1 in North Oakville is nearing a completion, and phase 2, which represents a substantial amount of area, is set to be released. And so it's important to get these types of revisions in place before that development proceeds. This can't wait till the end of the review. development will continue to proceed. In terms of the proposal before you, we're addressing revisions in these key areas: stormwater management facilities, the Trafalgar and Dundas urban core areas, the neighborhood center area, some definitions, which we're going to get into in detail, and as well a new area, which was the reason for the second statutory public meeting on this file, was to do with a phasing clarification, and we'll be covering that in detail as well. Just like to remind Council as well to keep in mind that the North Oakville Secondary Plans Review is being undertaken in two parts. This is the first part with these revisions that we would like to get in place sooner rather than later, and there'll be a second part to look at bringing the entire plans up to date with required planning policy, and as well to bring them into the livable Oakville planning framework. So that'll be part two. Another, as mentioned, the policy context around planning has changed in the years since these plans were approved. The notion of a complete community now is a requirement to deliver in terms of our planning and our development. There's a definition there in front of you to set out complete communities, and this is a definition that we'll be introducing into the plan through these revisions. Just a little bit more context. The Planning Act has been updated more than once since these plans were approved. The date of the PPS is 2014. The new growth plan and Greenbelt plans are dated 2017. The date of approval of the North Oakville plans, for context, is 2008, 2009. We also have in the town of Oakville a new approved urban structure. Just to review briefly what that looks like for council. It's a very quick summary of it. It's intended to protect the natural heritage system. It's intended to maintain stability in the existing residential areas. And it is intended to direct growth to a system of nodes and corridors. And you've heard a little bit about nodes and corridors earlier this evening. That's a theme that will be coming back to council in a lot of the work on the official plan, and certainly through this work in North Oakville, is to implement this urban structure. Really, the nodes and corridors are places to direct growth. The North Oakville vision itself is, in its time, was leading edge, and it's still valid today. It's really to provide for a variety of residential densities and unit types throughout the planning area, responding to the varied needs of future population, and directing the highest densities and intensity to the corridors to support a broad range of services and a mix of uses. So this is actually really an early vision for a complete community. Other aspects of the North Oakville vision deal with pedestrian safety and movement, cycleways and walkways, and a distribution of uses so that residents do not need to rely on the automobile to meet their daily needs. So as I mentioned, this is still a valid and important vision to keep striving for through our development in North Oakville. We've been at this study since May 2017. Prior to that, May 2015, when we launched our official plan review, we indicated that we'd be undertaking the North Oakville Secondary Plans Review. And since May of 2017, we've been bringing forward our work to the Livable Oakville Council Subcommittee on numerous occasions, directions report as well, the first statutory public meeting on this file in February of this year, 2018. Along the way, we've had numerous public engagement opportunities and a significant amount of stakeholder engagement with the key landowners in North Oakville. We've been meeting with that group on this file since 2014. And I'd just like to point out as well that we visit a number of these issues through the development application process. So this is bringing together a series of conversations that we've been having over a long period of time. So the first area of revision, you may recall from the first statutory public meeting, was to try and strike a balance between infrastructure and development in the urban core areas. So we had initially brought forward a prohibition on storm ponds in the within 100 meters, and that was really just to try and find a new way of developing along those corridors. And there's a picture there of Dundas where a significant amount of area is consumed with stormwater facilities instead of buildings which would be supporting transit and that sort of complete community components. Since that time, we've revised that prohibition to be a permission subject to criteria. And it's really trying to strike a balance between stormwater management, which is a critical, very important infrastructure need in the area, as well to provide for buildings and people and opportunities for living and working in these areas to add to that complete community. And so some of the aspects of that is to try and minimize the frontage of the ponds. If you can imagine, these ponds were oriented in a north-south instead of an east-west direction. That might be one way we could minimize the frontage along the corridor road. We're also a bit of an incentive. So if you have some land that is going to be consumed with pond, then you could take that developable opportunity and transfer it to urban core lands adjacent. So that provide for some additional height. Some ponds are exempt due to the nature of the advanced nature of their environmental and their engineering work. A pond is so far along, we're not going to open that up and go backwards. And then, of course, all other policies of the plan need to be met. And so that's what the nature of the revisions to the stormwater management facilities. The Trafalgar Urban Core is a key area. It's the next area I'll be discussing in terms of our revisions. North of Dundas, Trafalgar Road is intended to be a bit of a spine for Halton Region, and it's planned to support high order transit and a very intense tall development. And as indicated through our urban structure, it's a key corridor for us and connecting nodes. So the vision for North Oakville is for mixed-use development, pedestrian and transit-oriented. It's to be the densest in North Oakville, with building heights of 15 to 20 stories and beyond in some locations. We have not been seeing proposals bringing forward that scale of development in order to satisfy that vision and to support the future transit ambitions that are planned for the corridor. And so what we've done is we've clarified and refined and strengthened some of the existing policies to try and concentrate more intensity along that corridor. So we've brought in the first, we've brought in a minimum required transit supportive density as per the provincial growth plan. We're also, if you imagine the area identified in bands. So in the first band of 100 meters, we're bringing in a minimum height of 8 stories. In the second band, we're bringing in a minimum height requirement that's between 100 and 300 meters, a minimum required height of 6 stories. And beyond 300 meters, which would be to get to the maximum edge of the core, 500 and a little bit meters, so between 300 and 500 meters, a minimum height requirement of 3 stories. Along with that, in key areas, we're essentially prohibiting standalone townhouses. So within that first 100-meter band, we're looking at apartments, tall buildings, which may have smaller, below 8-story elements of buildings, but they need to be attached in part of a comprehensive development. So standalone townhouses would be prohibited. And then within the bands out from 100 to 300 meters, some criteria for providing for limited amounts of these standalone type townhouses. And just to strike a bit better balance with support for the vision of the plans. The next area of revisions is the Dundas Urban Core. And in our first statutory public meeting, we left it open a little bit for further revisions to other high-density areas or other core areas that, once we were refining these policies, that might find a place in other core areas. So for the Dundas Urban Core, we are taking a similar approach. We're going to have a minimum transit supportive density applied to these lands. Again, the vision is very similar, mixed use and high order transit plan for the corridor. So we're looking for dense buildings, apartment buildings, and a mix of uses. We are prohibiting standalone townhouses adjacent to Dundas. We're not using the same sort of band approach, but we're trying to shift more of that intensity on those remaining opportunities into those core lands right on the corridor. There's a conflict between height and the FSI requirement, which is a density measure. So we're removing that FSI requirement, as we have done also in the Trafalgar Urban Core. As mentioned, the transit supportive density is applied here, and that same idea for pond lands being the height or the development opportunities on those pond lands can be transferred to adjacent core lands. And that's again to try and maintain some intensity there and support for the other aspects of the corridor. And this is just to reinforce that it's a key part of our urban structure. Should have clicked on that at the start of the slide. Okay, here we are, the neighborhood center area, the next area of revisions in the North Oakville plans. And this is where it kind of gets a little bit interconnected in terms of housing mix and permitted uses and the definitions around low and medium density. So I'm going to go through it and try and make the links in the remarks. The vision, again, in the neighborhood center area is to accommodate a range of medium density residential development, including live-work units and some limited commercial and civic uses. So the idea is to have, as shown here from the master plan of the North Oakville East Secondary Plan, in these red areas, a little bit more intensity, small apartments, medium density uses, townhouses, those sorts of forms, and concentrating in here a neighborhood center area. So that would be a node in like a little mini corridor kind of concept. And this would be areas for people to find their needs on a daily basis, find some transportation options, connect to the transit system, etc. So we're not seeing development in these areas that would be supportive of that vision. And you may recall this slide from an earlier presentation. We're seeing a lot of housing and not a mix of commercial uses, and we're seeing a lot of low-density housing in these neighborhood center areas. So a lot of detached where we would expect to see a little bit more townhouse or a little bit more apartment-type development, or where apartment-type development would be appropriate. And so to bring back that vision in these revisions, we're essentially proposing a couple of things here. So what's new is instead of having the option of providing commercial uses or not, we're going to have a requirement to provide one mixed use or non-residential type building in these neighborhood center areas. We have seen some live-work development, and there are some concerns around that, and we have seen some of these neighborhood center areas develop with no commercial uses at all. So this is a requirement to provide a mixed use type of development in this location. And again, that's to try and meet those aspects of a complete community. We are, through our revisions to the definitions, which I'll get to in a little bit, we're going to be essentially prohibiting detached or low density type uses, semis and singles, and duplexes in these neighborhood center areas. To help support that, we've introduced permissions for apartments in these areas, and we've increased the height up to 6 stories. We feel it's appropriate to limit some of the lower density development in these locations. There are still significant areas remaining where these low density singles, semis, and duplexes can be developed. So it's to try and provide a better balance. And some of the submissions that have been received, we're really trying to get at this concept. I have some illustrations that will help to understand how these effects would take place, but it goes along with a little discussion around definitions. First, in order to satisfy conformity with the region and the provincial plans, we are introducing definitions for complete communities, the definition of a regional transit priority corridor, strategic growth area, and some language around interpreting may, should, and shall. And we're also removing the permissions, if you will, for small lot singles, semi-detached, and duplexed uses from the medium density definition. So this is way in the back of the plan in section 10. So that would be essentially a strikeout for medium density. And in the second bullet, as mentioned, we're adding the permissions for apartments. And then previously at the STAT public meeting, we had made a revision to the high density residential definition. We're actually putting it back to the way it was, which is more consistent with Livable Oakville plan. So we had taken out stacked townhouses and back-to-back townhouses, and we're putting those back into the definition of high density residential. Just a little side note on definitions and densities and form. it's done, they're categorized and classified a number of different ways across a number of different planning documents. And so this is an interim solution, we think, to solve some of the problems we're seeing, or to correct some of the problems. But it's important to note that we will be clarifying all of this through the region's official plan review. So they have a greater interest in these types of definitions, if you will, and so we'll be working with the region to bring it all into harmony and in conformity, and as well Livable Oakville will be going through that same review on these same categories. Here are a few slides that just bring it all maybe back together and address some of the issues that have been raised and that we feel addressed appropriately, the matters raised through some of the submissions. So this is an image from the North Oakville East Secondary Plan Master Plan, which is an appendix to the plan. It really gives us our best picture of how the designations line up. And it's a little bit small to see, but here we have, if you recall our urban structure, we have Trafalgar Urban Core, Dundas Urban Core, we have this sort of darker orange neighborhood centers, and then we have what's called a general urban area and a suburban area. And you've received submissions that say that the proposed revisions are going to limit the ability to develop the detached low-density uses in other designations, and then that would not be consistent or in conformity with the provincial documents. In fact, we feel that the revisions will help to distinguish the neighborhoods and provide greater certainty in what we're getting where, and to help realize that vision to be consistent and in conformity. So I'll advance the slide and you'll see that, so today this slide shows where you may develop the low density uses, and that's pretty well in every designation across the plan area. With our revisions, you lose the permission to develop low density uses, so singles, semis, and duplexes, in the neighborhood center areas and in the core areas. So those are key areas for other elements of a complete community. The remaining general urban transition, which is an area up here, general urban, this orange, and this buff colored suburban, these areas still are opportunities to develop singles, semis, and duplexes. And further to that, we are seeing already examples of these uses being developed in these designations. So not only will the permission still exist after these revisions, there are some developments exhibiting these forms in these locations. And just a little correction that we noted in our review of the submissions that came in, a statement was made that the density cap in general urban is 35 and the same as the suburban. It is in fact 75 units per hectare. So that's plenty of density range to develop semis and duplexes, as contrary to what was written in the letter. Last area, and this is the new area, and I didn't save it for last on purpose, but it's a bit challenging. It's a bit challenging for me as well. It's very technical, so I'll be sticking to my notes, and I'll try and bring us through it, and then that will wrap things up. This is a clarification for phasing. There's a requirement in our planning documents to establish phasing policies to guide the orderly development of complete communities. And this is found in the PPS, it's found in the growth plan, it's found in the region's official plan, and as you would expect, it's found in the local plans. So North Oakville is intended to develop in 3 phases. This blue color here is the first phase. The second phase is this purple here. Sorry, it's getting a little skittish. And then the third phase is this group of neighborhoods over here. So there are policies that in the plan that provide for phasing to advance. So once criteria is met from one phase, the next phase can advance. And that is what this clarification is dealing with, a small technicality around the provision of infrastructure to support growth and meeting these phasing policies. So there's a primary phasing policy that says 75% of the previous phase needs to be registered and or zoned in order for development of the next phase to proceed. So 75% of phase 1 needs to be zoned or registered before development in phase 2 can advance. We're getting close to that. We're not at that stage, There is an alternate phasing policy that says for selected neighborhoods, Phase 2 lands could advance ahead of the 75% rule being achieved. And it was anticipated that market demand would be for residential, and so that residential Phase 2 development is linked to the provision of Trafalgar urban core lands as well some employment lands. So additional neighborhood development can advance in Phase 2 if we have provided some urban core lands and some employment lands. And so the phasing essentially says neighborhoods 8 and 9 can advance if those two requirements are met, or neighborhoods 6 and 7 can advance if those requirements are met, the employment and core lands, or 9, 10, 11 could advance. And we have, a group of proponents have brought forward and have really essentially ready to develop neighborhoods 8 and 9 under the unphased development provisions. And we're at that point now where the registration of Green Ginger 1 and Star Oak North, Green Ginger 1 is Trafalgar Urban Core, Star Oak North is employment lands. So there's sufficient land in those subdivisions to allow for neighborhoods 8 and 9 to advance. However, there are some other things that go along with that. The neighborhood lands in here are subject to a hold, and it's really to allow the orderly progression of the advancement and the registration of these subdivisions, as well the provision of infrastructure to support that growth. Once those have advanced sufficiently, a hold may be lifted, and then the neighborhood development could occur. There's been a delay, let's say, in the delivery of some regional infrastructure. William Halton Parkway through this area is delayed. And as such, it's an unforeseen delay, and it has the opportunity or the potential to kind of delay the orderly progression of these neighborhoods. And so as the policy reads now, it requires that or the interpretation of the policy, it requires that services be extended, that they are extended, and that they need to be physically in the ground in order for development to proceed. We're of the opinion, staff is of the opinion, that securing for an agreement for the installation of those services that are the responsibility of the public authority would give a similar level of comfort to have them physically installed. So accordingly, the OPA is revised, or is proposing clarifications, introducing language around that the town and the region must be satisfied that services are extended, and that providing for an agreement to secure the extension of these services. So it's a clarification, it's a revision. Again, it continues to protect the town's and the region's interests as far as infrastructure and orderly development, and it allows these other pieces to fall into place. So that concludes the phasing piece, and there we are, get the mouse back. So thank you for listening. Just briefly, the study next steps are to conclude this meeting, and then we'll be proceeding with part 2. Some key deliverables under the part 2 part of the study: transportation discussion paper, a North Oakville commercial policy review, an urban design review, and we're aiming to complete this in conjunction with the region's official plan in 2020. And the question has been raised and just stated here: what are the implications of these new policies on plans that are in progress or that might be before the Ontario Municipal Board? And those will all be evaluated on a case-by-case basis. Finally, here's again our recommendation that we have that these be approved on the basis that they're consistent and that with the provincial policy statement, that they conform to the applicable plans, that they have regard for matters of provincial interest and represent good planning for the reasons set out in this report. We're further recommending that the bylaw 2018-074 be adopted, and that bylaw 2018-075 be adopted, and that notice of council's decision reflects the council has fully considered all the written and oral submissions relating to this matter, and that those comments have been appropriately addressed. That concludes my remarks. Thank you for listening, as mentioned. Since we are still at a stat public meeting, I will turn it back to you, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bigger, for that delightful navigation of these muddy waters. Council and the public, everyone needs to know, I think, that the published recommendation in the agenda is going to be supplemented, or Councillor Knoll wishes to supplement the printed recommendation with 2 additional clauses. And Councillor, would you like to read them and you take a chance to speak to them if you need to?
Sure. Yeah, it's okay to provide some context? Okay, is it okay to provide some context with this as well, or do you want me to read the resolution?
I think it'd be fine if you did.
Okay. And can we maybe put it up on the screen? Is that possible as well? Thanks.
It's on its way.
Thank you. So thank you, Your Worship, for the opportunity to chat about this. We've been aware of the fact that there's been a school hold overlay on the property located at 3056, I believe is the address, or is that the address? Anyway, the property is located at the corner of Neagawa and Dundas. I don't have the address in front of me, I apologize. It's a property owned by the McGowan family, and they're in the audience with us this evening. This has been an overlay that was placed since 2008, and it identified approximately 20 acres of land on the northwest corner of Dundas and Neagawa for a future secondary school site. The Halton District School Board has requested that the town require 2 high-school sites within the secondary plan area, and the town supported these sites, given the synergies with the town's arena and the future community center, library, and sports fields. The Halton District School Board requires approximately 12 acres to accommodate a secondary school, which would allow for the development consistent with the urban core designation on the balance of that site. In 2016, the town indicated to the board that they would be prepared to provide additional lands to the school board to address the desired site plan. It was the town's expectation that well within the last 10 years, the school board would have defined a specific location for the school, thereby allowing the balance of the lands to have the school symbol removed, giving the landowners the ability to proceed with their future plans. So as part of the recommendation this evening, I'll be moving that an additional 5 and 6 be added, and they're on the screen now, but I'll read them for the record. That the Halton District School Board be requested to determine the location of the school required to accommodate the needs of the North Oakville East Secondary Plan as soon as possible, and bring forward a zoning application to permit the new school and release its interest in any other lands on the 20-acre block. And number 6, that staff be requested to report by the end of 2018 on the status of the Halton District School Board secondary school location. And just very briefly editorially, we've basically left this privately owned land in limbo for an extended period of time, 10 years in fact, and it's about time that the school board take some action and actually give this family some comfort as to what the future of their lands holds. So I understand there's a delegation, I believe this evening, from the planning staff that has been retained by the McGowan family, so we'll be hearing more about this later on, but this is the resolution that I would ask all members of council to consider this evening.
Thank you, Councillor Knoll. I thought it was important to get everything on the table. Councillor Grant, I believe you have questions.
I do, thank you. And thank you for your report. Experience has been showing us that, and you mentioned moving, Mr. Bigger, to more transit, but experience has been showing us that the modal split has not been matching what we had hoped. And so, of course, there's grave concern about parking. In your report, you mentioned that there are questions about that, and you'd mentioned that, I believe it was Appendix E, where there'd be some result or some comments on it. Unfortunately, we don't have an Appendix C with this report, but in D, you do seem to touch on it. So kind of a two-part question. One is, what are we doing to try and consider better parking solutions for the new communities being built? And the other part, if we are supporting transit, then how far are we going? We do have a wonderful, not just because it's in Ward 5, but a wonderful setup for a transit node up at the corner of Dundas and Trafalgar, which we are looking to expand. But as we go further and deeper into a better transit system along Trafalgar, are we looking at other transit nodes up along that corridor?
Thank you, through you, Mr. Chair, to Councillor Grant. In fact, my opening remarks, I had intended to clarify the Appendix E and Appendix D question. There is no Appendix E. The references in the report to Appendix E should read Appendix D. So Appendix D to the report is part 2 of the study and how we intend to address these other issues comprehensively in part 2. So the transportation discussion paper is where we'll be looking at the modal split, the links to the transportation master plan, looking at other transportation opportunities, and the issue of parking as well will be dealt with there. We have a number of parking initiatives that are going to be initiated, utilization surveys, and how we might begin to secure for parking opportunities in the future. So that will be coming through part 2 of the study. It is a top item to achieve through that. And in fact, it may come ahead of everything else, or we're not necessarily going to bring it all together at the very end. We might be able to advance some of these pieces earlier through that. As far as transportation hubs or transit facilities, I believe that there are locations identified in the secondary plan for in the Palermo area for a transportation facility, a transit hub, and that's top of mind, the location and the design of that type of facility.
Thank you.
Councillor Ilger?
Thank you very much, and thanks very much for the detailed presentation. It goes back a long way to OPA 198. Now, I agree with what Councillor Knoll is proposing for us to do, and I'm just trying to understand the area that Councillor Knoll is referring to. That is now urban, Dundas and Niagara urban core, the whole thing? Because we spent a lot of time on this back years ago. And I think, and at that time it said it was highest and best use, I guess. That's the designation or whatever for highest and best use?
Yes, so the property is dual designated. I don't think I have an image of it. I would have something.
No, but you get the idea. That's
yeah,
all.
the idea. So it's a Niagara address,
right.
but the lands are designated Dundas Urban Core.
Dundas Urban Core.
That's right. And then there's also that secondary school designation that's applied to those properties on that corner. So it's the northwest corner of Niagara and Dundas.
Now, we spent so long on that. The word designation comes up, but I remember the OMB, it said conceptual designation. Is that? The words mean, words hang on everything. So I think it was the NOE, the North Oakville East or something, number 2 or something. I think it was always said conceptual designation, not just straight designation.
I think it's strong enough in the policies that that a school should go there, and that's why an official plan amendment would be the way to remove that sign. Where exactly?
Right.
It occurs on those lands, a 20-acre parcel. There's lots of room for a school there and other uses, and so that's maybe where it's a little less firm in terms of the designation.
Okay, so let's say it goes for school, so that's still the owners then would get the highest and best use land value, I guess. Is that how that works?
Well, you mean in terms of compensation from the school board, or what the school board would pay for it?
Yeah, exactly. You got it.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I don't think I can really comment on the valuation of those lands, but certainly there's a real estate transaction that would be involved, obviously.
Because that was a big deal. Some of us were around back then, and that was a huge deal. And I remember as staff at the time saying, if it goes to school, the residents would still get highest and best use. I just want to confirm that that is in fact true. Jane, I think you were around then.
My apologies, I didn't hear the question.
No, the question, Jane, it went back to, and we spent a lot of time on this particular property because the school got moved from the land that was owned by the developers over across the road. And I remember at the time it said, well, what would happen is if the school buys it, they would have to pay highest and best use for that property. And I assume that's still the case, right? The way this is worded and how things are going?
Yeah, that's correct. The Dundas Urban Core is the land use designation on the property, and then there's a high school symbol on it. So the school board needs to determine how much land they need in exactly the right location that they need the land, and they would pay market value for those lands.
Okay, okay. I appreciate that. We spent so long on that thing in the back a number of years ago, so thanks very much. I appreciate the clarification.
Our next questioner is Councillor O'Meara.
Thank you, Your Worship. I have two questions. One might be to the mover, Councillor Knoll, just with regards to the items 5 and 6, or the recommendation amendments 5 and 6. And as, you know, a councillor who's overseen a plot of land in Lakeshore Woods that has lain dormant for years and years and years and years, and given the timing with an upcoming school trustee board election this fall, I'm just wondering, is this a realistic request of the board at this time to ask them to determine, or if not, what are we hoping to get out of them if they just don't move on it, as I have witnessed, you know, again for years on this? I guess I'm just trying to wonder what the move is here to try and get them to do, and if that's a feasible time frame for them.
Your Worship, can I respond to that, or try to respond to that?
Councillor Knoll.
Yeah. I mean, obviously, the school board is the school board, and they operate under the jurisdiction of the Ministry of Education, so they have certain rights that we can't necessarily force, I believe, and perhaps the staff can clarify this. I think that the goal here is to really put their feet to the fire here and emphasize the fact that this has been going on for a very long time, and this isn't simply a land banker that is sitting on land waiting to develop at some point in the future. This is a family and a church, I should point out, two families and a church that are in fact being impacted by this overlay on this property that's been there for 10 years with no end in sight at this point, because the school board has not made a determination. So I don't believe we can force them to do anything. That's been my understanding after, as Councillor Elgar mentioned, years and years of discussing this matter. But certainly it's time to shine light on this and bring it to the school board's attention, and really put, I think, significant emphasis on our requirement or our request to take this into serious consideration. We have cooperated with them to the nth degree, including, as stated in the preamble to my resolution, we cooperate to the point of even offering land exchange, such, and it's really, they basically just been dragging their feet. So this is, again, just to reemphasize, this is really putting feet to the frying pan, or feet to the fire kind of situation here, and hopefully bring some light to the situation.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. That makes sense to me, and item number 6 is utmost important then when it comes back, that they report back, and perhaps there's a new Minister of Education who might like to hear the response that the school board is giving at that time. I appreciate that.
And not to mention the fact there is a trustee election with our election as well, so there'd be an opportunity to air this in that process as well.
Thank you very much for that clarification. I do have a question now to staff. On slide 13, you mentioned live-work units, and every time I hear that from being in Bronte, I get a shiver down my spine. I'm wondering if you might be able to just go in detail about what you mean by live-work, and if it's the live-work that I have heard and seen over the past years that absolutely does not work, what you mean by promoting live-work units and that node there.
Through you, Mr. Chair. So thank you for the question. The current policies in the plan provide for opportunities to develop live work, which is of a similar form that you'd be accustomed to in Bronte Village. So a townhouse with a shop or some other commercial use at grade, and some housing, an apartment above grade. And so that's the concept of live work, and we've seen some limited development of that type in North Oakville. And I won't get into the difficulties of that form, but it's not essentially satisfying the community's need for commercial uses in the neighborhood. And so with these revisions, we are broadening the opportunities for live work or mixed use. So we're taking that idea of a small mixed use concept to a larger building, a taller building, and a mix of uses. So we haven't eliminated the opportunity for live work, but we have broadened the opportunities for commercial development in the neighborhood center areas. In addition to that broadening of permission through height and form, we are requiring development in these locations now of one building, one non-residential building. And so that's to try and, again, ensure that we are achieving that mix of uses at the neighborhood level.
I appreciate the mixed use sort of syntax there, because I think that's more pertinent to what we're trying to accomplish. I think the quicker we move away from the live work concept, that really is not a live above and work below, it's really a rent above and rent below, and invest and speculate is what it turned out to be, I think the better. So every time I just hear that sort of we're allowing more live work, I get a eerie feeling about the issues that we deal with in terms of all the knock-on effects that came along and that sort of failed the live work project. So I appreciate the parlance of the mixed use rather than the live work aspect, but I understand the constraints we're in. So thank you, Your Worship.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Grant? No? Yes?
I have exhausted my
Councillor
questions.
Knoll?
Thank you, Worship. First, just a small housekeeping matter. I had a mind seizure there for a second. I couldn't remember the addresses. So for the sake of the record, the addresses in particular are 3056 Nagawa Boulevard. But I also want to emphasize that this doesn't just apply to that particular property. It applies to neighboring properties at 1013 Dundas Street West, as well as the Serbian church, the St. Peter and Paul Parish at 1039 Dundas Street West. So I just wanted to clarify that. Through your worship, Councillor Grant mentioned it earlier in the context of overall parking issues. You had referred to the fact that, and you had alluded to the questionable success of live work and how that's worked throughout the town, and you talked about a change in commercial designation, neighborhood commercial, I think you said. Was that accurate? Was that the... within the communities, you talked about a change of commercial format to a neighborhood commercial format. Is that what I didn't write it down what you actually said.
So through you, Mr. Chair, just the exchange I was having with Councilor O'Meara.
Yeah.
Yeah. So currently it's a live work permission.
Right.
And no requirement. We're broadening that permission to be a mixed use.
Okay.
So permitting apartments, taller buildings up to 6 stories. And broader, more flexible buildings.
I was just looking for the term, because the question relates to one of the points of failure that many of us that have lived work in our communities point to is the total lack of parking and ability for customers to be able to navigate these properties. And is that something that you're going to take into serious consideration as you're moving forward with this, to look at something that's going to actually have a chance of success rather than what we're experiencing right now?
Through you, Mr. Chair, absolutely. So the parking concerns are can be associated with the neighborhood center commercial uses. They can be associated with some of the residential areas, and those are different concerns. So there's a couple, 3 maybe ways we'll be looking at parking in North Oakville, including parking to support commercial uses.
We should probably just put something on a loop from North Oakville Council we can just press that says, remember the parking, because it's a challenge we've had. My last question is with respect to, I understand the phasing concepts, and we've often experienced over the years the challenge around high density being built after the low density or even the medium density. Is there anything that can be done in terms of the phasing to require density first? I know this is a question we've asked before as well, but is that something that could be conceived of for the future to avoid some of these I guess, combination of fights and people that may not necessarily know what they were buying into in the first place?
Through you, Mr. Chair, yes. So we don't have any new tools on hand to compel the high density in advance of other forms of development. And so perhaps in the short term, the situation will perpetuate itself in the community. But we are continuing to look for those solutions. And while we may not have an answer now, there may be an answer that we haven't come across yet in other locations.
Require legislative change in order to achieve this?
Yeah, I mean, that might be a Planning Act matter.
Okay.
Yeah, we're probably not alone in the growth plan area with these concerns.
Okay. Thank you, Worship. Thank you to the staff.
Before I come back to you, Councillor Grant, we have a first-timer beside you, Councillor Adams.
Thank you very much for the presentation. Do you have a slide that might show the Dundas corridor in some fashion? I know you've got a couple that showed the, that one might work. I wondered if you could help better understand the shifting of heights around stormwater management ponds along the Dundas corridor in particular. On page 249, you've got the section that talks about section 7.6.5.2 around provision of additional height beyond the maximum for lands adjacent to the stormwater management ponds. On page 652, which is way at the back of the material, I think the section is 7.6.5.3, so there's two adjacent sections that speak to this issue. And if I understand it correctly, it allows for up to 16 stories with bonusing in some particular locations. Can you help us understand where those locations might be and how significant would they be? How large would they be in terms of the width of the roadway and so forth?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I'll try and break that down for the councillor. There's two core areas that we're looking at through these revisions: the Dundas Urban Core, which I have up here, and we've made revisions to the secondary plan to provide for additional height beyond the maximum of 8 stories, and we're doing this in 2 ways. The first way is through the transfer of developable area that would be associated with a pond, or developable area lost because it's in a pond, and that could be transferred to adjacent lands to 4-story maximum, 4-story in addition to the maximum. So that would take you to 12. And we are also providing for bonusing an additional 4 stories. So if you had a parcel adjacent to a pond, you could go an additional 8 stories potentially through bonusing and through that transfer of height. Those would be in so very few locations where you'd be able to double up like that, but that is one possible opportunity.
Can you show us where that might happen?
We haven't gone so far as to test those locations. We are trying to, with these revisions, continuing to essentially work with the existing height permissions and to try and provide some incentive for additional development to balance off the losses that we've had along the Trafalgar core because of those ponds.
So I think what we're seeing here is a section that's along the to the west of Trafalgar, and I think a lot of those sections are far along in terms of the planning process and the development process. Which areas, the only areas that I think might be subject to this might be farther to the east of Trafalgar. Is that basically correct?
There may be some additional lands east. Certainly the employment lands would be subject to that same stormwater management configuration policy.
So are you speaking to the areas on the, like over towards Bronte?
Correct. So residential or Dundas Urban Core lands to the east of Trafalgar and also to the west or through the west part of the plan.
So this would be to the area between the creek and Third Line is what you're speaking of, basically?
Correct. It's essentially those lands are employment lands or lands under appeal.
And would they be, are there rules in place that would restrict it to the corners? As I'll call them, gateway feature buildings that are at the intersection? So, I mean, in this case, on the picture that you're showing us in front of us right now, we've got stormwater management ponds that in some cases go straight to the corner and 2/3 of the way across the block or something. So the transfer of additional height, is it intended that the additional height would be placed at the intersections?
I think that intersections are a place for a focus of intensity. We don't have a policy in the Dundas Urban Core that directs it in that way. We do in Trafalgar. We anticipate that there will be more opportunities there for this additional height to be taken up.
And with respect to the use of the bonusing on top of the 12, is it up to council to determine whether they're willing to go from 12 to 16? Or are we going to be in a position where we're forced to have 16?
No, these would all be subject to a development application and zoning bylaw amendment. So council would certainly be engaged in those decisions. Absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
Anybody else? Councillor Graham?
Thank you. Just to dovetail on Councillor Knoll's question about density building high before we build small. With the full realization we can't tell people what to do with private land. Pardon me. And with the hope that maybe a potential buyer would travel the property area before they buy a home, could we envision some way perhaps of putting up a large sign, much like you would with a planning sign, on that property saying, this is going to be a very tall building at some point, somewhere, so that when people drive by, they will know that, okay, I'm going to have some kind of giant structure behind my home at some point. Is there some way we could include that in our planning?
Through you, Mr. Chair, there are currently requirements to provide a sign when a change is being proposed. And we are, as a department and a commission, looking at ways of improving that level of communication. So I think that unless, I'm not sure if any of my colleagues have a better answer, it's a good idea. And whether or not we could include that in our application process, might be a place for it.
It would be nice because as we've learned from the past, developers or sales offices don't quite often provide the full information about what's going on around the homes and might often say, oh, that's going to be open field for your grandchildren to play in, not often revealing that, well, actually there's going to be a 12-story building behind your home. So for us to at least be able to provide that information outside of that would be useful.
Council, I'm your servant and trying to get through the agenda, and so I think we've had a long discussion about things that aren't in this proposal before us, and if we want to finish tonight and not come back tomorrow, and/or don't want to extend the hour, we need to start thinking about sticking to the matters before us, and I say that in the gentlest and nicest way.
Very good, thank you. I will leave it as something for them to consider without looking for a full
And I didn't mean
answer.
to single you out. You're by no means the only, you didn't conduct the only excursion. Madam Clerk, I think we're ready to hear from our registered delegations.
The first registered delegation is David Capper.
Hello, Mr. Capper. We look forward to your information.
Good evening, Your Worship. Thank you very much. If I could ask our colleagues in the IT department to switch me over to the overhead camera, that would be wonderful. Thank you. For the record, Mayor Burton, my name is David Capper. I'm a planning consultant with Glenn Schnarr & Associates. Our mailing address is 10 Kingsbridge Garden Circle, Mississauga, Ontario, L5R3K6. I'm here this evening on behalf of the McGowan family, whom are the owners of the property that's located at the northwest corner of Dundas and Neagawa, and the municipal address is 3056 Neagawa Boulevard. As you've heard from some of the discussion this evening, the subject property is designated as a Dundas Urban Core designation, and it's encumbered with a secondary school site overlay. As Council is well aware, this is a high-density mixed-use designation that allows for upwards of 8 stories and I believe 10 stories at the corner site, at the corner of that intersection, with an FSI of 2.5 times the lot area. On behalf of our clients, we did submit correspondence for Council's consideration at the February 12th P&D Council meeting. At that Council meeting, there was some discussion amongst Council with respect to this particular property. I note that our submission is included in Appendix B, and in Appendix C, you can see what staff has identified as our submission to this planning application. I do want to point out for the record that based purely on the wording that's included in Appendix C, item number 12, there's a misinterpretation on the part of staff as to our submission and how it was framed in the staff report. As you can see here, it notes that a request was received to remove the secondary school site designation from 3056 Neagawa Boulevard to be consistent with the livable Oakville plan. That in fact is not the case. In fact, specifically what we asked for, And this is the letter that was before you on February 12th, and I've highlighted the relevant points. As school site overlays are not found in the livable Oakville plan, and school sites are generally permitted in all designations in South Oakville, we are formally requesting that the school sites overlay designation be removed from the North Oakville secondary plans, and that the future consolidated livable Oakville plan, and that I indicated that this would ensure consistency throughout the livable Oakville plan. Obviously, the intent of this exercise is to align both the livable Oakville plan with the North Oakville plans. And as I've pointed out in our letter, one of the ways in which the livable Oakville plan deals with school sites is it does not designate them as school sites, period, on any land use schedule, and it includes policies that indicate that they are permitted in all land use designations, with the exception of the natural area designation. Our submission seeks the same treatment for all school sites in North Oakville as they do in livable Oakville. It's not a site-specific request. We are of the opinion that the request is an important consideration at this point in time as part of the first phase of the North Oakville review, because I think it will help you alleviate some of the issues that you're discussing tonight. The densities that have or haven't been achieved in the Dundas urban core area, your issues with respect to stormwater management, ponds, and transfers of densities. Removal of these school site designations on all properties will help alleviate some of these issues. It's our opinion that the requested amendment does not prejudice the development of any property that is currently encumbered by a school site overlay for the purpose of a school or developing a school. Nor does it prejudice the school board's ability to secure a potential school site. In fact, we believe it does quite the opposite. The proposed amendment allows for flexibility in site selection for the school boards. It allows for consideration of alternative sites should a particular site not be available or attainable to the school board in a time frame that it's required, or if the site is cost prohibitive given its underlying land use designation. As council, you are well aware that the school board has every power of expropriation. They don't need the school site overlay. At any point in time, they can register an expropriation plan and take the sites that they're interested in. It's evident through the livable Oakville example and how school sites are treated that this is an unnecessary planning tool that doesn't need to be in the North Oakville official plan. In summary, we're of the opinion that the requested amendment is an important consideration at this phase of the North Oakville review, and it should not be delayed until a later phase of the review process. And we request council's reconsideration of our request despite the staff position on the matter. Thank you, Mayor Worship. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Capper. Are there questions for the gentleman? Councillor Elgar.
Hi. You talked about the designation. It is not a designation in our official plan now. It's a conceptual designation, correct?
Through you, Mayor Burton, to Councillor Elgar. The Dundas Urban Core land use designation is the underlying land use designation. It is encumbered by, in my words, perhaps encumbered is a rather strong a word, but it does have the school site overlay.
Which is a conceptual designation.
I'm not 100% certain that the official plan language uses the word conceptual.
Yeah, it's 7.614.1. The elementary and secondary school site designation on figure NOE2 is a conceptual designation.
Thank you for the clarification.
So now, with what you're asking for, since this was approved by the OMB, do we have the power, in your opinion, to do this, what you're asking for, rather than what Councillor Noel has put forward tonight?
Through your worship, I won't purport to be your legal counsel and give you that advice. I think that's a better question from them. I can give you my opinion as to your ability to amend your official plan as you see fit.
Okay, so you're not, okay, fine. I'm fine. That's good. We'll ask legal about this. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Capper, for your information.
Thank you very much.
Madam Clerk, the next delegation.
Okay. I'll ask
That was
legal.
our only listed delegation.
Are there other members of the public with information for council on this file? Madam Clerk, I see none. Councillor Knoll, you've put your, did you only speak to your additions, or did you move the entire thing and add your additions?
I've moved the entire thing and added the additions.
Thank you. Councillor, is there discussion? Councillor Elger?
I'm just trying to get clarification from staff regarding designation or conceptual designation. Conceptual designation that was put on by the Ontario Municipal Board, does that give us any power at all to change something right now? Since the word conceptual is in there?
Through you, Mayor Burton, I've just been discussing it briefly with my colleagues. The conceptual designation, I think, just goes so far as to indicate that there's a recognition that the school board intends to put a school site there and doesn't go much beyond that. I certainly am not in a position to advise council tonight that we're in a position to remove that designation without having further reviewed the OMB decision.
Councillor Knoll?
Should we add that as a resolution or part of this, or just staff direction that legal counsel report back on this? Because this is a significant issue, obviously, as to the legality of removing that designation. Yeah. Should we, I'm looking for your advice, Mr. Chair. Would you like Mr. Mayor, would you like a?
Well, if you'll stop and think about the entire matrix that is all of the land in North Oakville, and the two high school sites that were the result of pretty much a master planning exercise, I'm not sure that we want to rush into removing a designation, conceptual or otherwise. And the better report would be to ask what would be the pros and cons of doing it, rather than could you do it? You know, if you wanted to be.
Well, that could include, can we do it? And then the benefits and the disadvantages of doing it obviously would be a report we'd be interested in hearing, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, you could certainly do that.
Okay, so you'd like that as a, I'm sorry, there's some advice.
Madam Commissioner.
Thank you, Mayor. I did want to add that the school sites that were put into the secondary plan were done, as you had indicated, by master planning process that really tried to develop complete communities so that this park and the school, elementary or high school, were all located in close proximity. So there was a fair amount of detailed work that was then recognized through both the designations as well as the symbols that were placed on the land use maps, as well as on the master plan. That is not an official designation in the plan, but it demonstrates how those lands would be built out. We did, as part of Phase 2, intend to review those elementary and high school designations in a comprehensive way so we could keep intact those principles of developing under a complete community. So we would be proceeding with doing that in Phase 2. I think that would be beyond the time frame that we'd be reporting back by the end of 2018. But certainly at the end of 2018, we could look at what should be the next steps to take place. If the school board has not done anything, what could the town do in terms of looking at comprehensively how we treat high schools and elementary schools within the North Oakville plan?
Thank you.
That's excellent.
You know, with that advice, my own position on it would be, it's only my thought, would be, we've built this plan to have a symbiosis between our Great North Park and the high school for the kids. And the only hypothetical result we could get from removing the designation is it would not be a school. Whatever high school was eventually provided would not be in such an advantageous location. And the children would be the losers for it. So I think I would be in favor of following the staff advice and just leaving it be for the next phase.
Your Worship, I think that the advice of the Commissioner is excellent, and I'm satisfied with that as a course of action. I just want to be clear that I'm not necessarily advocating the suggestion by Mr. Capper, this is a very specific issue to this particular property. There is a solution at hand for the school board to proceed even on that property. And really what we're saying, I think, is that we just get it done and let's not drag this on forever. Again, this isn't a land bank situation. This is somebody's private residence, 2 private residences and a place of worship.
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, Oakville, above all, is a family-raising town, and we care very much about the education of our children, and we're trying as hard as we can to give them a first-class experience everywhere. And we're only a supporting role to the education ministry and the school boards, but we do represent the parents who want the best for their kids. So I agree with you. Is there other discussion, or shall I put the vote? All those in favor? Opposed, if any, and 7 is adopted. That brings us to item 8, and that is the recommendation report and the zoning bylaw amendment and the draft plan of subdivision for Halton Catholic District School Board 2123 Hickson Street, which is, in my view, quite the success story for us in terms of our management of the loss of schools. Mr. Thun, would you like to review this, summarize it for the public?
Thank you, Mayor Burton, members of council. The Halton Catholic Separate School Board submitted a zoning bylaw amendment and draft plan of subdivision for 2123 Hickson Street, the former St. Anne's School. And as part of that proposal or submission, it was for the creation of 14 residential lots in a plan of subdivision on a 17-meter wide public street. Also included in that proposal was a 0.314 hectare park. Staff from the town have already, or the town has already entered a purchase and sale agreement with the Halton School Board, our Halton Catholic Separate School Board, to purchase that park. So there's an agreement already for 0.7 acres, which is close to 0.314 hectares. The report can be found on page 415 of tonight's agenda. And as I had mentioned, staff are recommending providing recommendation on the application. Just quickly to go through for the information of council and the members of the public on Town TV. The application area, as you see on the air photo right here, is Hickson Street at Solengate Drive. It's a residential area. The school site is presently vacant. The school has been vacant for several years and has been deemed surplus by the school board, the purpose of the application before us. And surrounding this site are single detached homes. From a livable Oakville designation perspective, the site is designated as low density residential. It allows for detached dwellings at 29 units per site hectare. The proposal, which is before council tonight, is at 12 units per hectare. From a zoning bylaw perspective, the application is to change the CU to the RL3-0 zoning category. This RL3-0 zoning category is consistent with everything around the subject property. There are no regulations or special provisions that the applicant is proposing, so the stock regulations within the parent bylaw, 2014-14, are the ones that they are proposing and will be developing to. The draft plan of subdivision and the associated lot areas and lot frontages are before you on the slide. As you can see, Street A is a cul-de-sac. It is 17 meters wide. 14 lots are being proposed to wrap around the street, with Park Block 15 having frontage on both Street A and Hickson Street. Street A also intersects with Solengate Drive to the south, making it a four-way intersection. The lot areas and the lot frontages are all in accordance with the RL3-0 zoning regulations. One comment also with regards to cash in lieu. Town is buying the park, but cash in lieu still will be required for the development of the 14 lots. So just would like to make that, provide that for the information of the council. We did have a public information meeting on March 6th. There were 14 members of the public. Comments were raised at that meeting, and comments were also raised at the statutory public meeting of April 16th. In the staff report tonight, you will see section related to the comments that have been raised and staff's response to those. Notice for this meeting was posted on the sign and was also mailed out on May 25th. So, matters addressed in the staff report that is before council tonight. As I had mentioned, we had received verbal and written comments from the general public as late as April 16th. Those dealt with lot size, tree preservation, parkland, grading and drainage, fencing. There was also a comment raised from an abutting landowner regarding lot 13. Lot 13, the size and frontage complies with the zoning. Okay. It maintains the RL3 rear yard setback that is being proposed. There are no changes to that. That is consistent with the entire neighborhood. Matters raised from the technical and agency review process, those included grading, drainage, transportation, servicing. Those are all captured in the staff report or the conditions that are being recommended tonight. We also looked at it from a consistency, conformity perspective from the provincial policy statement, the growth plan, and also the region's official plan. And finally, we also did a review from an urban design perspective. One of the comments that was raised throughout the process was tree preservation. As you can see from the overhead, this is a tree preservation plan that was submitted as part of the supporting documentation for the application. The areas shaded in green are those areas that are proposed to be preserved. You will see trees that are being X'd out that are originally proposed for removal. Through the detailed engineering review, there will be an additional analysis on potential tree retention of those trees that are proposed to be removed. So as you see from here, there may be trees that are originally proposed to be removed. Those could stay. We do have to be cognizant of the fact of grading and drainage issues also at the same time. In addition to that, Street A, which was a public street, will have trees planted on it in accordance with the standard tree locations in our subdivisions. There will also be new trees planted within the park. That'll be up for consideration there. And also we're encouraging the landowners to plant trees on their property, which in totality from what is being preserved, what is proposed, will definitely have a benefit to our tree canopy in the town. So in conclusion, Your Worship, members of council, staff are making a recommendation for the approval of the zoning bylaw amendment and the draft plan of subdivision. We have reviewed it to be consistent with the provincial policy statement. The proposal conforms to the growth plan, the Halton official plan, and the Livable Oakville plan. We believe it is good planning and is in the public interest for the reuse of a vacant school site within the community. Thank you, Your Worship.
Thank you, Mr. Thun. Council, we have no registered delegations. Let me check if there are any members of the public here with information for council on this file. Yes, ma'am. Would you like to come forward, introduce yourself for the clerks, and share your information?
I filled out the designation, but I wasn't sure who to submit.
I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
I filled out the designation, but I wasn't sure who to submit it to. But I will introduce myself. My name is Sabatina Vasalli. Sabatina Vassalli. I am one of the homeowners that submitted my suggestions or my comments with respect to lot 13, which is the lot that abuts my property. I live at 235 Sunray Road. The issue that I had brought up at the other meetings, I believe that I have emailed Mayor Burton and my councillor and my other councillor who didn't make it tonight. My issue with lot 13, I understand that the setbacks are consistent with what is allowable, but lot 13 is the smallest lot of all of these lots proposed. The house that is proposed to sit on that lot sits the closest to my property and my neighbor's property than any of the other houses that are proposed for this development. So that's my one issue. My second issue is that the actual size of this lot, while I think it's permittable by the zoning, isn't consistent with the size of the lots in this area or in the size of the lots in the community generally. And then my final concern is if we go back to the sheet that had the trees on it that are supposedly going to be cut down, If you see the section right behind or right at lot 13 shows the trees that are going to be cut down. And I had thought that there was only one big, beautiful, mature tree there, and it turns out there's not just one tree. There's probably 7 trees there. I've taken pictures of them, if anybody wants to see them. And so my concern is we have this lot, which is not consistent with the other lots. It's small. It looks like it's slapped together so that they could sell one additional lot. It's intrusive to me and my neighbor, and all these trees are being cut down to create this lot. And I think in my letter, I had detailed that of the 13 trees being cut down, that's in fact 30% of the trees that are being cut down in the whole complex. So I'm all about, this is a beautiful subdivision. I don't take issue with that. What I asked in my letter was that the 2 lots be made larger. So I don't know if it's 12 and 14 or whatever it is. I'd ask for those to be made larger as opposed to, slapping lot 13 there, slapping a house on it and cutting down the trees to create that lot.
Okay, thank you for your information.
Thank you.
Councilor O'Meara.
Thank you, Your Worship. I did just want to clarify with staff on this issue, and for those of you who maybe have not driven by, it's tough when you look at a small circle with a red X through it and say, well, that's just a tree getting taken out, but these are large 50 to 80 foot high trees that are all just going to be slammed down. And so I guess my question is what sort of trees are we going to be able to put in there? Are they again going to be the kind of lollipop trees we see that go in these new developments? And also what sort of avenues will we be able to do to increase the tree canopy, primarily along the park? But I mean, we said engineering development will have the opportunity to look and see how many more trees we can preserve. But I guess I'd ask staff to maybe flush that out a little bit more. What does that what does that entail, and what may we be able to look for in terms, in particular, of lot 13, where the delegation was very right. There's a huge cluster there. But what can we maybe expect out of that process, or how will we engage with the public in that process in terms of when engineering development gets a hold of what we can do there?
Through you, Mayor Burton, to Councillor O'Meara. I'll start, and maybe I can get some assistance from Eric from the subdivision process. But if you look at lot 13 and some of the trees that are being proposed to be cut down, and they will be looked at again, the one right there, tree 100, is actually in the town's boulevard. Okay, so you have servicing issues that you'll have to deal with there. You also have a number of trees that are potentially in the side lot line. Right? There's grading and drainage issues that are also occurring there. Okay. From the park's perspective, there will be trees looked at through the park's design. And then, as I had mentioned, Street A will have trees incorporated as part of the boulevard and driveway location exercise. Eric, if you can assist on that also.
Through you, Your Honor. Looking at the plan now, I haven't calculated and I haven't got the engineering in front of me, but it appears that we'd be looking at probably approximately another 22 street trees, and we'd have to talk to our colleagues in forestry to see what kind of planting plan they would have for the park block itself.
Thank you for the information.
Just one further, you will also notice trees in lots 1 and 2 down at the bottom here. Those are trees that would be reassessed at the engineering stage. They're at the rear property line. They're off the side property line. Those could potentially be protected at the same time. Okay.
Councilor O'Meara, I don't see any other thing to detain us. Is this, as it's in your ward, do you have a motion?
I will. I will move the recommendation, and also Councillor Robinson did want it noted that he couldn't be here, but he wished to support the recommendation as well. But I will move it. Thank you, Your Worship.
Thank you, Councillor. Shall I put the vote? All those in favor? Opposed, if any, and that's carried. On item number 9, we have the recommendation report for the Livable by Design Manual Part B. This is the urban design direction documents for the Bronte Village Growth Area and the Kerr Village Growth Area. And Councillor O'Meara, If you or any members of the audience require it, we have a presentation available from Christina Tizard. Are there members of the public with information for council on the design manual? Madam Clerk, there are none. Councillor O'Meara, what's your pleasure?
I'd be happy to move, Your Worship, if it suits my colleagues.
Thank you. Council, shall I put the vote? All those in favor? Opposed, if any, and that is carried. Thank you, Councillor O'Meara. Item number 10 is the recommendation report for the proposed official plan amendment for the Town of Oakville former Public Works site. And we have a presentation from Trish Collingwood. We also have a number of registered delegations, at least one anyway. Trish, we're ready for you to summarize this for the public.
Thank you, Mayor Burton. Before I get started, I would like to take a moment to quickly mention that there were many other staff members across the town, as well as the Region and Conservation Authority, that assisted in the master planning process for these lands. In particular, I'd like to mention Gabe Charles, Carly Dodds, Jeff Abma, and Shadi Adab from the Planning Department, as well as Cindy Toth and Jeffrey Lee from Environmental Policy, Philip Kelly from Development Engineering, and Jill Stephen from Transportation Engineering. The purpose of this report is to present the Public Works Site Master Plan and corresponding official plan amendment number 25, as well as staff's recommendations. The subject site is outlined in white on this slide and is located on the west side of Trafalgar Road, south of Oak Park Boulevard. The property is bounded by Glen Ashton Drive, Trafalgar Road, and the future extension of Taunton Road. The property is ideally situated adjacent to Trafalgar Road, which is planned as a multimodal transportation corridor. The subject lands are part of the Uptown Core growth area, outlined in red on this slide. The subject property was once the town's public works yard and was declared surplus and decommissioned in 2003. The property has been on the market since 2011. The opportunity to assess the development potential of the public works site came through a master planning exercise came about after examining the recent development applications in the surrounding area, and in preparation of confirming that the growth strategies for the town's growth areas represent good planning as part of the Livable Oakville Review. There's been a lot of interest in development of previously vacant lands in Uptown, particularly adjacent to the site, including the Oak Park mixed-use building at the southwest corner of Oak Park Boulevard and the townhouses along Taunton Road, outlined in red, as well as the 6- and 12-story M.C. Branthaven apartment building, outlined in yellow. Further along Oak Park Boulevard in blue is the 5-story mixed-use building, and then north of the site to Dundas and Trafalgar, just at the very top, outlined in green there, is the Cortell site with the 4 towers ranging from 12 stories to 25 stories. At the southern end of the property, there are 2 pipelines that cross the property and a hydro easement in favor of Hydro One. Environmental investigations conducted several years ago identified salt contamination due to the use of the property as the former public works site. The town has retained consultants to update the condition of the site and ensure that remediation activities are completed to the most current MOE standards. The Uptown Core Review was an important study completed in support of developing the Livable Oakville official plan. At that time, a site-specific density for the work site was not identified within the policies. However, a preliminary development scheme considered a potential of 1,909 residential units in primarily mid-rise building form with a mix of uses. This scheme did not benefit from any comparison to the direction in the town's Livable by Design manual, since the review predated the manual's existence. Last month, staff kicked off the Uptown Core Growth Area Study in support of the policy update work that is being done for the Livable Oakville Review. The Public Works Site staff team was tasked with coming up with potential options for the redevelopment of the former works site. Staff revisited the original Uptown Core review to determine whether the original assumptions affecting the site remain true given the surrounding development completed or underway and the current market trends. Staff undertook a master planning exercise to understand the constraints affecting the site as well as the existing built context. This process included identifying the policies and guidelines that influence the redevelopment, identifying the site-specific constraints, using this information to form a road network and development blocks, and we allocated the land uses and built form that allowed for appropriate intensification as well as transition to the proposed development blocks. Staff took the time and examined the best planning estimates, which were produced by Halton Region. The BPEs provide an anticipated amount of residential units within a given area for the purposes of planning for infrastructure and monitoring growth. This exercise has led to staff concluding that a minimum of 215 residential units must remain allocated to the former public works site. This number has been clarified based on the number of units in the broader area surrounding the site. The master planning exercise examined the opportunities and constraints relative to the former public works site to ensure that future development is responsive to community needs and sensitive to the existing built context. This exercise was guided by the town's official plan objectives and policies, along with the town's livable by design manual, and premised on several principles, including connections, sustainability, and desirability. These principles were used to form the future development, were used to ensure that future development was well integrated to multimodal transportation options, was sustainable in terms of environmental achievements, but also social infrastructure, and was a complete community, not just in and of itself, but also well connected to the established surrounding community. The master plan identifies development blocks and phases, planned intensification, and minimum densities and appropriate built form. The proposed development blocks are identified around the planned and proposed road network, as well as the pipeline and hydro easements to the south of the site. In order to balance between open space and built form, new park and open space is proposed at the heart of the site, in the middle, while the extension of the Winfield Park system is shown at the southern end of the site. Recent development applications throughout Uptown provided staff with a detailed breakdown of units throughout the geographic area in comparison to the best planning estimates used in 2009 for the Livable Oakville plan. The master plan exercise has allowed staff to take a conceptual look at the distribution of units across the three areas noted on this site for the slide. Each area has a minimum number of units, which corresponds to a minimum density that must be achieved. At a minimum, 1,215 units, as I said, can be accommodated on the former public works site without undermining the best planning estimates. As you can see on this slide, there are varying heights permitted throughout the site, in contrast to the existing height permissions for 8 to 12 stories that currently are within Livable Oakville. Zone B and Zone C allow for more transition of heights on the western edge of the site to complement the existing form on the west side of Taunton Road. The proposed official plan amendment included on tonight's agenda reflects the master plan and provides a finer grain street network that can support tall and mid-rise building forms while providing some direction for how to consider a comprehensive development scheme for the whole of the site. that can be integrated with the established neighboring community. The most notable change in the official plan amendment and across the site will be to permit standalone townhouses in Zone C, where the built form can be 4 stories. Currently, townhouses are only permitted on the site if they share a common wall with an apartment building. The proposed official plan amendment would maintain the same urban core designation as the site currently enjoys. The existing height permissions allow up to 16 stories, subject to bonusing. This is beyond the maximum of 12 stories. The new height schedule for the site would permit 16 stories as of right, but only in select blocks. An additional 4 stories may be permitted, but again, only through bonusing to a maximum of 20 stories across the site. Or, sorry, I'll go back just to show you. Maximum of 20 stories in Zone A. The remainder of the site has a lower range of heights, with taller built form closer to Oak Park Boulevard and reducing in scale towards Glen Ashton Drive. Standalone townhouse forms are proposed on the east side of Taunton Road to complement the existing building form, as I mentioned, as well as on Glen Ashton Drive to complement the newly approved townhouses that are on the south side of Glen Ashton. This height is lower than the existing height permissions, and as such, the amendment is required to implement these changes. Oops, sorry. The result of all the work that we completed is a new master plan that demonstrates how the site can develop to achieve the master plan principles, which allows the plan to be conceptual in nature and not prescriptive. It's considered as a comprehensive review of the property. It sets out a refined program for building heights and densities that recognizes and protects the established neighborhoods. It provides clarity on build form. It knits together missing transportation links. It continues to promote a network of parks and open spaces, and it permits supporting retail and commercial opportunities. Next steps include the environmental remediation of this site. So the existing record of site conditions, the certificate of property use, as well as phase 1 and phase 2 environmental assessments on the site are out of date. Studies are underway to update the conditions of the site, and staff note that residential uses are already permitted on the site based on the existing record of site condition. The work has been done. However, the town's currently going through the exercise to confirm existing conditions and update everything in conformity with new MOE standards. As council will recall, direction was provided to create a municipal development corporation, or MDC. The refinements being proposed through the master plan exercise and resulting amendments will assist the MDC in being able to move forward with specific phases and development blocks without the need to attempt to develop the whole of the subject site at one time. The MDC is assumed to be responsible for future subdivision and site plan approvals, as well as construction timing and agreements, and coordination of any property sales. Through each rezoning application on the individual blocks, the blocks will be studied to properly assess the impacts on infrastructure and servicing, planned densities, shadows, and overlook concerns, transit capacity, as well as the environmental remediation and the potential coordination with the region to include public benefits such as affordable housing, as well as through bonusing. There's elements that we can look at with public art, public space, transit amenity waiting areas, and active transportation connections. In conclusion, staff put forward the following recommendation as shown for council's consideration: that the report from the Planning Services Department dated May 18th, 2018, entitled Recommendation Report Former Public Works Site be received, that the official plan amendment for the Town of Oakville's former Public Works site be approved on the basis that it is consistent with the provincial policy statement, conforms or does not conflict with applicable provincial plans, Halton Region's official plan, the Livable Oakville Plan, has regard for matters of provincial interest, and represents good planning for the reasons set out in the report. That bylaw 2018-29 to adopt official plan amendment number 25 be passed, and that the respective notices of council's decision reflect that council has fully considered all of the written and oral submissions relating to these matters, and that those comments have been appropriately addressed. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Collingwood. Council, we have a registered delegation. Shall I call the delegation next? Mr. Brad Bruder, the urban planner on behalf of Habitat for Humanity, Halton, Mississauga. Welcome. Council looks forward to your information.
Mr. Mayor, councilors, staff, and guests, my name is Brad Bruder, and I'm an urban planning student at Habitat for Humanity, Halton, Mississauga. On behalf of the organization, I want to first take the opportunity to thank all of you for your time and your commitment to our organization since we began building in 1999. The former Public Works Site Master Plan is a great example of the community establishing its commitment to make Oakville a more equitable place. I congratulate and thank staff for their efforts on the master plan so far, and I look forward to the progression of this project as you work towards your municipal vision to be the most livable town in Canada. A livable city ultimately relies on 5 main pillars: a robust and complete neighborhood, accessibility and sustainable mobility, a diverse and resilient local economy, vibrant public spaces, and perhaps most importantly, affordability. Section 21.2.1 of the Livable Oakville Plan states that the primary objective of the Uptown Core includes ensuring the opportunity for a full range and mix of medium and high density housing types, including affordable housing. The former public work site is part of the Uptown Core, and the municipality is working to place affordable housing as a primary objective of this site for the development, as they described in their master plan. I'm here today to ask for your continued partnership and your trust in our organization as we begin to change our model to build at a larger scale and become relevant to the Oakville community, as well as the Halton Region community. We have been working in the Oakville community for over 19 years, and we plan to continue to build so long as there is a need for affordable housing within this town. As the municipality goes forward within their master plan for the former public works site, we'd ask that you consider our charitable organization as a primary go-to partner for nonprofit affordable housing. At Habitat for Humanity Halton, Mississauga, our mission is simple: a world where everyone has a safe and decent place to live. Community orientation, long-term sustainability, affordability, innovation, and inclusivity are just a few of our core principles that lie at the foundation of our organization. Over the last 19 years, our organization has built 41 affordable homes in the Halton and Peel region thanks to the help, commitment, and passion of our municipal and regional partners, that is, all of you. We value the opportunity that we have within the Oakville community to provide families with a hand up to affordable home ownership. We have over 13,845 active volunteers in your local community who believe that providing affordable housing in Oakville is not only the right thing to do, but something that we must do if we wish to sustain an equitable community, that is, a community in which everyone has a fair opportunity to succeed in life. Over the last 5 years, our organization has come a long way. We've changed the way we operate from the ground up based on 3 main pillars: research and engagement, financial remodeling, and housing remodeling. We've been actively engaging with municipal and regional staff, nonprofit organizations, and even for-profit developers to generate meaningful partnerships that will allow us to build at a relevant scale to the town of Oakville. We've also changed our definition of family so that we, as a charitable organization, can provide housing for people from all walks of life, and this includes single parents, LGBTQ+ couples, and marginalized populations. As the housing needs of the community have changed, we have also changed our housing model to provide meaningful options to low-income families. Our organizational focus is no longer on single detached housing, as we desire to build at a larger scale that is relevant to the town of Oakville and the housing gap that we can experience. Currently, in the Halton region, over 3,000 applicants sit on the social housing waiting list, with an average wait time of 3 years before being provided subsidized housing or being removed from the list. Now, Habitat for Humanity Halton, Mississauga has come to recognize that building a few single detached homes will not solve this housing problem, which is why we are heading in a completely different direction as we move forward. Last year, we completed our first mid-sized condominium for 13 families in Burlington, Ontario. However, we have much bigger plans for the future. This year will be our largest year of development in Habitat for Humanity Halton, Mississauga. We are currently building 24 homes in Burlington, Georgetown, and Mississauga municipalities. We are also in the planning stages for a socially mixed hub containing a community center and 40-plus affordable seniors units integrated with market housing in Burlington. Looking ahead, we have 43 more units in our property pipeline and over 400 new units in discussion with developers and other partners in the community. We strive to help our partner municipalities to build complete communities in which an appropriate mix of housing, including affordable housing, may be provided. We have also adjusted our financial model to allow us to fully leverage our assets for the very first time to build more homes faster. We've partnered with a new financial institution, Van City, dedicated solely to nonprofit social good, giving us the opportunity to execute innovative housing solutions. With our new rent-to-own financial and housing model, Habitat will also be able to keep our housing affordable and in perpetuity forever. It also provides us and our partner families with the strength of owning equity, but also allowing us to maintain the flexibility required of the 21st century family. This is just a glimpse for you to see where our organization is heading over the next 5, 10, 20 years that we operate within this community. We're scaling up our organization to show our partner municipalities that we desire to make a meaningful difference in the community with respect to affordable housing. Because of our changing model and our commitment to building a better community, I sincerely hope that the municipality of Oakville will consider us as a primary partner to build nonprofit affordable housing in this community. We hope that we can be involved in the development of the former public works site, as well as future affordable housing developments as they come to surface. I would like to conclude by saying thank you once again for your time today and your continued commitment to our organization as we grow to become a relevant asset to the town of Oakville. We hope to lead the pathway of innovation within the affordable housing sector as we continue this partnership with you. Thank you.
Mr. Bruder, thank you for your presentation. It's very impressive, and I would like to answer just by indicating that this council has taken every opportunity presented to it so far to work with you. We are a big believer in your model, and I have personally always been impressed with your organization's commitment to the I'll call it the complete needs of the family. So the locations being within walking distance of the needs, and you know, that helps reduce the cost of living there. And so you've made a great start here in everything that you've done, and your presentation tonight has only built on that, and I thank you for that.
Thank you very much.
Any other questions for Mr. Bruder? Thank you, Mr. Bruder.
Thank you.
Any other members of the public with information for council on this matter? I see none. Is there a mover for the recommendation? Councillor Chisholm, shall I put the vote? All in favor? Any opposed? That carries. Thank you, everyone. It's a big step forward for us. We have a confidential discussion item that it's my advice to you we can move in public, and if you agree, I need a mover for the following motion: that legal staff be authorized to proceed in the local planning appeal tribunal hearings related to applications filed by Dunoak Developments, Bressa Developments, Graydon Banning, Martillac Estates, Dundas Trafalgar Inc., and Green Ginger, in accordance with the report from the legal department dated May 18th. Is there a mover for that motion? Councillor O'Meara, thank you. All those in favor? Opposed, if any? That is adopted. Council, you will note that the item C2 has been withdrawn, and I would ask your attention to the Heritage Oakville Advisory Committee report. Councillor Dudek, or Giddings, do you want to guide us here?
Move all of them. Thank you.
The report from Heritage Oakville has been moved. Any discussion? All in favor? And that is adopted. And that's a long report. Now, a motion to rise and report to council would be in order. Councillor Lischina, all in favor? And that is carried. I rise and report the Committee of the Whole has met and made recommendations on consent items 1, 2, and 3, public hearing items 4, 5, 6, and 7, discussion items 8, 9, and 10, and confidential discussion items C1 and C2, and advisory committee minutes item 11, as noted by the clerk. May I have a mover and seconder for my report? Councillor Knoll, Councillor Elgar, all in favor? Thank you. The report is adopted. We now need a mover and seconder for consideration and reading of the bylaws as listed in the agenda. Councillor Grant and Councillor Adams. Oh, excuse me, Councillor Grant and Councillor Longo. Get the new guy on there. All those in favor? Opposed, if any? The bylaws are adopted. That completes our work. It's been terrific working with you. Thank you very much for your time and attention, and we are adjourned.